And the title of our lesson is Utilizing Other Ministries. You know, we're talking about planting a church. It's nice to have help. How many know that? Last time we talked about the relationship between the sending church and the one who is sent, and some of the help that can be provided there. But one of the other ways in which we can get help in relationship to the church plant is to have what I would call guest ministry or visiting ministry come in to help do the work. Now, this won't happen a lot, but hopefully sometimes you will be utilizing opportunities that come your way to have other people come and minister in your assembly. And what this can do, it can help to grow the church, it can help to deepen the message of the church, and it can help to supplement your leadership. I know for some pastors, just having a Sunday off once in a while is kind of a good thing in the sense of not having to preach every Sunday. But you can strategize in this area, and it can become an effective instrument in your hands. I think over my lifetime, the various ministries that have imparted to me were certainly the local ministries that I was associated with, but also many other ministries who came to our church and spoke at various seasons of our church. Those also were key moments of impartation to me personally. We want to talk about how we can use guest ministry or how we can use visiting ministry as a positive influence in our churches. So our first point here today is outside ministries can be a positive influence in the early growth of the church. We mentioned before that when you start the church, it'd be nice to have some covering from maybe a couple elders from the sending church. Well, those would be ministries that you could use, but there would be other friends that you have developed in the ministry or ministries that you are aware of or know about. Now, you can't always go for T.D. Jakes. I know everybody wants T.D. Jakes to come. That might be a little bit of a stretch. But there are many other pastors and leaders all around us who could actually impart a good word to our people, and we'll see how that can be a very positive influence in our own setting. Guest ministries have the power to bless, to strengthen, and to encourage the local church. And here are some of the ways that they do that. First of all, letter A, by providing a breath of fresh air. Now, when you lock yourself in a closed room and you just breathe your own air, it gets kind of stale after a while. And some churches are kind of like that. The only ministry they ever have is ministry that is inside their own church. And again, it goes back to a comment I made in another class, and that is that a man who lives alone thinks his own thoughts. And it's kind of like you can get almost spiritual claustrophobia where you're just drinking out of the same pool all the time, and you don't realize there's other water out there that could come in, or other kind of beverages. Maybe the only drink you drink is a certain type of a drink, and then you realize, wow, there's other things out there. Wow, this is good. And so sometimes because you can't have it all, you can't know it all, there is a value in bringing a breath of fresh air into the congregation. Every church can get stale if it constantly breathes its own air. Guest ministries can bring in a refreshing to the church that is in a time of drought or discouragement. And so I think sometimes just getting a visiting ministry in, they're going to say things a little different, they're going to operate and function a little differently, and sometimes they're going to get away with things that you couldn't get away with and say things you couldn't say, but also there's going to come a freshness to what you're doing, and so that's good. Now, I don't recommend doing this too much. There needs to be a balance. Some churches start, and that's all they have, just guest ministry. Well, nobody ever gets to know the leadership and the pastor and so forth. I think the senior pastor of the church should be the principal feeder on a Sunday morning service, but occasionally there should be times where they bring in others to share the word. And some of those would be in the church themselves, but I'm talking about primarily those from outside of that particular local church. Letter B, another way they can bless, strengthen, and encourage is by providing a variety of expression. I always thought it was good that in the church, my children had other voices into their life besides dad just kind of droning on and on and on, or mom just droning on and on and on. They get kind of used to those voices. And so I was always happy when the youth pastor or the children's ministry people would input into my children, or maybe their school principal would input into them, or their coaches would input into, other pastors would input into them, because it's a different voice coming from a different direction with a little bit different sound to it. And if it's affirming and confirming the same thing, well, that's great. Every ministry is unique and is used by God in unique ways. By exposing people to a variety of ministries, it gives them input that they might not otherwise experience. You know, I think that it's amazing to me how people receive differently from different ministries. I'm the kind of guy, I receive from a ministry who's deep in the Word, and they got a scripture reference for everything that they say, and let's get deep, let's get into it. And one of my favorite teachers, of course, was Kevin Conner, who I had a close relationship through my life, but sometimes he got so deep, you needed scuba gear to follow him, around in the Word. And I remember many times I sat there and he was maybe preaching or something, and I think, man, this is rich. This is good. Boy, he is really opening up the Word and giving me revelation and insight and understanding. And then after the service, I'd go out after the service and I'd hear people talking. They say, man, I didn't understand a word he said. And I went right over there, right over the top. I don't know what he was talking about. I'm thinking, man, that was so good. It was so rich. It was so wonderful. Then I get another visiting ministry come in, and he's a storyteller, and he barely touches the Bible, He puts the Bible down there and then starts telling stories, He tells about how he was raised on a farm, and he talks about chickens, and he talks about this, and he talks about that. And I'm thinking, fluff, this is just nothing but fluff. Give us the Word. I don't care about your chickens. And then after the service, you'd hear people in the hallway say, man, wasn't that a great message, man? I wish our elders would preach like that. Man, that was so good. What was good? What did he say? He didn't say anything. But different people receive different from different kinds of voices and different kind of personalities and stuff. And I think it's important for us to remember that because, if they're only getting from us all the time, I think we need to give a little variety out there for people. For instance, if I was a teacher, which I am, and not that prophetic, which I can be, but it's not my first gift, when I had ministries in, I'd want to bring in a prophetic ministry. I want to bring in a storyteller, somebody that can just get people jumping up and down and shouting all over the place and running up and down the halls, because they're probably not going to do that when I'm preaching. I want to give them something that I'm not. You understand what I'm saying? Rather than giving them another teacher that's just exactly like me or something like that. And so I think it's all very strategic in my mind and thinking about what do people need outside of me to be what I want them to be. And, you got your prophetic types. You got your people that are, well, on the other hand, maybe you don't teach at all. Maybe you are that just in the clouds all the time. Well, then you maybe need to bring teaching ministries in and so forth, so your people can actually get something a little bit more tangible when they're coming to the services instead of maybe just a lot of emotion. And so it kind of works both ways. But when you bring in visiting ministries, you can create a little variety. And if you can create variety within the house, then they won't feel so like they need to go someplace else to get that variety and go visit this place or that place or the other place, because their pastor is a little bit more animated, their other pastor is a little bit more didactic, or whatever their desire would be at that point in time. So we give them some choices right there within the house. Another reason why guest ministries can bless, strengthen, and encourage the church is by exposing people to all ministries. Now, I say that because lots of times when your church first starts, or even, for many years in a church, you may not have the Ephesians 4:11 ministry gifts in your church. You might not have apostles and prophets and evangelists, pastor, teacher. You may be one of those. You might be more of a teaching pastor, or you might be more of a just pastoral. You might be more evangelistic in your approach. You might be more prophetic in your style. And your people need to be exposed to all five ministries. And so, because I find that every kind of person on a volunteer level has a certain type of ministry that they really relate to. For instance, if you had a prophetic gift, or you had a real burden in the area of prayer, probably the prophet's ministry would be one that you would really gravitate to and you'd really receive from in a powerful way. But if there were no prophetic ministries ministering in your church, then it'd be like, okay, it's another teaching, another teaching, another teaching. Or maybe you are a teacher. Maybe you're teaching children, you're teaching youth, you're teaching different levels. Then you really like that teaching ministry, you know. Or maybe you're the guy who's wanting to get involved in outreach, saving people, you like to see and see a model of the evangelist, you know. And maybe, so you got all these different, maybe you're a caregiver in the church, and then the pastor's heart, pastor's ministry really appeals to you, or apostolic ministry sometimes is also very good, and so you don't often have this variety right there in your own local church when you're first starting out, and oftentimes like begets like. So if you're a teacher, you raise up other teachers really easily, but maybe you're not releasing some of those other ministries in your house. One of the ways you can do that is by bringing in that style of ministry that will help to encourage, fan, and inspire those kinds of ministry expressions in your church. So we want to be able to expose people to all ministries in a mature expression of that ministry. So by bringing in teachers and prophets and evangelists and so forth, other types of ministries, people were going to be able to experience those ministries and probably identify with them in some way for their own growth and development. Another way in which other outside ministries can be a very positive influence is letter D, is by providing objective ministry input. By providing objective ministry input. A ministry coming in from the outside can often see things more clearly than those people that are actually in the middle of it. They say you can't see the forest for the trees because you're kind of in the middle of all this stuff that's happening every day, and sometimes it's just good to get somebody that's not connected to anything, just sort of come in and say, can you see anything that we're doing that doesn't make sense to you? Or are there some things that we're doing that are actually hurting us instead of helping us? And sometimes it's even like just a natural building. You can be in it so often. You can be, I see some of these programs on TV. There's one that my wife and I watch sometimes called Cash in the Attic, where people go through these homes and they try to find some things because they want to raise some money to sell. And they were in this one, and it was just filled with just stuff. And you look at yourself and you say, how can anybody live in that house? Because this guy had a habit of going around, and when people threw things out, he'd pick it up and take it home, and pick it up and take it home. And his wife tolerated this habit of his. But what happened was, when they first had their home, I'm sure it was just normal stuff, like you got a chair and you got a table, And then he brought some stuff home, one at a time. Okay, we put that over there. And you get used to it. Then you bring some more. Get used to it. Get some more. Get used to it. And then you don't realize it's just kind of building up and building up, building up, so you can barely walk anywhere. And then somebody comes in. What? How can you live this way? What? I didn't really notice. Well, sometimes it's good to get an outside perspective, because sometimes the things that we're doing are actually kind of crazy in our schedule, in our programs, in the things that we're doing, and sometimes it takes somebody coming in from the outside. I know that one of the best things you can do when you get somebody coming in from the outside is say to them, you know what, if you see anything that could help us, please let us know, or actually maybe trying a little harder to get that out of them. I'm a little hesitant sometimes when I visit a church, because I don't think sometimes pastors really mean it when they say it. They say, if you see anything that needs a change, please let us know. What they're really looking for is compliments. Oh, you're doing everything so wonderful. Oh, it's just wonderful. It's just great to be here, and you're doing great. Because I know I've been burned a couple times, because they said if you see anything, so I bring up something, and then they get real defensive, and then, oh, okay. They didn't really want it. But I think to really want it is a good thing, because people can help you see things that you don't see yourself. And bringing in ministry that you can trust will help you with that. Letter E, another way they can help you is by confirming truths that are being taught by the local pastor. Confirming truths that are being taught by the local pastor. The truth is that, again, people receive different from different people, but sometimes guest ministries, they'll come in, they'll preach, or they'll prophesy the same things that have been going on in the local assembly, and what it does is it actually confirms or nails that down or makes it stronger in the church. It's kind of an amazing thing, if you've ever been involved in the week-by-week preaching, that sometimes you preach and you preach and you preach until you just feel like you can't preach it anymore, and you just don't feel like the people are getting it. Maybe it's trying to instill some value or vision or or maybe a new program in the church, and you're just talking about it. Everybody just kind of stares at you. Then a guest ministry comes in and preaches it, and the people say, wow, I've never heard anything like that before. You're thinking to yourself, what about the last 6 months? That's all I've been preaching. It's just all of a sudden something clicks, and the guest ministry gets all the credit for all the work you did. They get the harvest over what you plowed and sowed and planted and watered, and suddenly they get the increase. And everybody, oh, isn't he a wonderful ministry? Well, I've been preaching that for 6 months. Well, that's okay. I always tell people you can get a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit. And if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get a lot done. And so sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to come in, they're going to say it in slightly a different way, and all the pieces are going to come together, and bang, there it is. And that's okay. That's okay. They're going to be leaving, and you're still going to be the one on staff, so good. But sometimes it's good for them to confirm the things that are happening. And also, sometimes people will start to look funny at their pastors like, that seems kind of strange, Pastor. Is there anybody else out there that believes this kind of stuff? And then when that person comes in and preaches, they say, well, you know what? That's what our pastor's been saying. And here's another person who seems to be somewhat dignified is saying. And so, you know what? Maybe this is something we need to take seriously. And so, mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. And so it's really another witness that comes in and testifies of what you have been saying for the last little while. And it's great to see how God oftentimes just orchestrates that himself without any help from us. Letter F, another way in which ministries can bless and strengthen is by broadening the vision of the local church. One of the things that happens lots of times if you have a guest ministry coming in, especially if it's somebody that does do some speaking in different places and they tend to get around a little bit, they can give you a broader perspective on what's going on worldwide in the body of Christ besides what's going on in our assembly. Sometimes we kind of lose that connection to the broader body of Christ, and people who do travel a little bit and maybe minister from place to place can help us to see that a little bit so we don't become so isolated and narrow in our vision that we forget about there is a church out there called the body of Christ that we are a part of on a bigger scale. So they can broaden the vision of the church. Another way they can be a blessing is by providing assistance in times of crisis. And what I mean by crisis is not giving us a bunch of money. I'm talking about sometimes when we do get a little disagreement going, or maybe there's a conflict in the church, and a guest ministry can come in and help arbitrate, help us to sort some things out, and maybe come to a place of peace. Somebody coming in from the outside, a neutral party, that can attempt to resolve internal conflicts, especially between maybe leaders in the church. So sometimes they can be very valuable for that. Now, obviously, if you've been sent from a particular church, the people from that church would be the primary source for that kind of involvement. Another way they can be a blessing, letter H, is by deepening the message of the church. Deepening the message of the church. Lots of times people who travel in ministry or who are available in ministry have maybe special seminars or specialized teaching, in-depth teaching that they do that you don't always find available in the church on an ongoing basis. Maybe they do a special seminar on marriage enrichment. So you're bringing them in and you're going to do a special weekend on marriage. And it isn't something that maybe you talk about all the time in the church, but they bring an expertise. They bring in an area. Not every pastor feels comfortable speaking on certain subjects like marriage or family or finances or some other kind of a thing, but through visiting ministry, you can bring that message into your church even though you're not the one that's saying it. And so sometimes it has a great deal of value as you strategize about, well, what do we need in this church, and you have somebody out there who specializes in leadership development, or even a worship team that comes in and works with your musicians or works with the area of worship in the house. There's somebody that has that kind of a flavor to them, and their ministry. They love to train musicians. They love to train music leaders and so forth. And so sometimes you're saying, you know what, we need that. And so you look for that someplace outside and say that this person's really gifted in that. I wonder if they could come and help us a little bit with what we're doing. And then finally, another way in which they can be a big blessing is by providing counsel and encouragement to the local pastor. Oftentimes the local pastor can't always talk to everybody about everything, even though you want to have a good relationship with all of your leadership team. Yet sometimes, the senior pastor faces things, and and trials and difficulties that nobody else really can fully relate to, and sometimes it's difficult for a pastor just to look to another elder in his own church to get that kind of input. Ask for opinions, ask for counsel, ask for wisdom, because maybe the problem is more inside the church, and if he shared it with anybody else, it'd become a matter of gossip. And you need to sometimes find more peer-level relationships where you can just kind of bare your soul, know that they're going to be trusted with the information, and you can get personal ministry and prayer. And so sometimes, you know, when I visit churches, sometimes it ends up being more for the pastor than it does for the congregation. Just a shoulder to cry on, somebody to unburden his problems to, and they tend to do that when they get somebody from the outside. So those are some of the ways in which visiting ministry can be a blessing to the church. Now, also, number 2 here, and this is the other side of it, outside ministry can also have a negative impact on the church. And, of course, we're trying to maximize the positive and eliminate the negative. That's what we do. But while it is true that some of the greatest blessings have come to the church through guest ministries, it is also true that some very negative things can happen when proper precautions are not taken. Outside ministries have been known to do some damage. And as senior pastors, we got to see ourselves as the door to the sheepfold, and nobody comes in or out. We don't want thieves to come in. We don't want robbers to come in. We want only true shepherds to come in, people with a shepherd's heart that will do us good and not evil. And sometimes, of course, you get these, quote, traveling ministries who call you on the phone, or they write you a letter. The Lord spoke to me that I'm supposed to come. I have a word for you, for your church. No. If you don't have a relationship with them, you don't know who they are, beware. They don't have a word for you. They have a word that they need some more money in their ministry, and they need a preaching opportunity. And they'll call and they'll say, I've just been praying lately, and I have you on my heart. I just feel like God's saying something to me for your church. Oh, yeah, right. I'm going to be in the area. I'm going to be in your area. And I just wanted to make sure I could be available to you for possible ministry opportunity. Well, you'll get a lot of those things, especially the bigger you get and the more influential you get. There's a lot of itinerant people out there who just need to stay out there and not in your church. And so you have to learn how to be discerning when it comes to this, because whether it's your ministry or whether it's ministry from the outside, you are still the pastor or leader of that church, and you are still feeding your congregation through either you or ministries that you choose or select. I rarely ever would consider having a ministry into my church who was just on my doorstep and asking for preaching or making themselves available to me for preaching. Usually I'm going to be strategizing. I'm going to go after certain ones that I know my congregation needs. Because if you just sort of take whatever comes, first of all, you can be open to some serious damage. Secondly, you won't have the resources maybe left over to actually get the ones you want or the ones you need in your church. And so you'll say, well, we don't have guest ministries because we can't afford it. I'd rather see you spend all your guest ministry dollar on a rand on one good experience every year than to have a lot of little substandard experiences throughout the year, but yet really leave an impartation, really leave a deposit in the church, really leave something that was of value to the congregation and you that you're going to talk about for a long, long time. So what can happen with some of these, on the negative side with some of these ministries, first of all, they can sow seeds of contrary doctrine. You want to make sure that this person that you're having in is not going to be preaching stuff that you don't preach or preaching a doctrine that isn't acceptable to you. What I have found is that there is some kind of a thing that happens. I believe in this thing called spiritual covering, that the senior pastor and the elders of the church are like the spiritual covering for the church. And there's a protection that comes with that. But and there's a guard, I think, that comes to that, to the people that are under their care. But when you open the door to somebody to come into your pulpit, you are bringing them in under that covering in a sense, and you are saying to your people, go ahead, listen to these people and believe them. And what happens sometimes is they start teaching a doctrine that is false. It's a false doctrine. The Bible says there's going to be false teachers, false prophets, false apostles, in the last days. We can expect it. We can believe it. They've always existed, but they're going to exist more and more. And so they have some kind of a little twist, some kind of a little strange doctrine. There was a doctrine going around in the States for a while, and it probably still exists in some camps, where, it wasn't good enough to be baptized in water. You needed to be baptized in water for the circumcision of the heart. You had to use that language, for the circumcision of the heart. So they were rebaptizing whole congregations because they had a new slant on the formula. Well, that doctrine was very divisive. It really isn't biblical. We never see an example of that in the New Testament, but they were bringing it in. And so elders were being rebaptized and all this kind of stuff. And then I think, well, next time they get another revelation, they'll be baptizing everybody again. Well, what happens is, though, when somebody gets into the pulpit and starts preaching something like that, and you've given them the okay and you've introduced them, they will sow seeds in people's lives that you may never get out. Way back in the late 70s, early 80s, no, it was even before that, early 70s, there was a strong doctrine on discipleship and shepherding, and there were some very, very strong leaders in the world who were espousing things that were just a little bit out of balance. And I remember in our church, we had this one leader come in because we were starting small groups and stuff, and we thought he was the man to do it. Well, he had an apostolic grace in his life, but he said some things that were sown into the hearts of some key leaders that ended up really washing them out, because they grabbed this thing and they changed their expectation levels about this and that, and they were never satisfied again because nobody was doing enough for them. Nobody was doing this to them. They weren't being discipled like they thought they needed to be discipled. Next thing you know, they wash out. People who probably would have been good ministries at some point in time, because they got the hold of that seed and it germinated in their heart and it produced negative fruit. And so we need to be careful when we put people in our pulpit that they're not going to be saying things that we simply don't believe in. And that means there's going to have to be some research that goes into these ministries, so we know they're going to have a message that builds and not a message that tears down. I don't want to be building something over here and bring in a guest ministry, pay all that, whatever needs to be paid to get one, and then him tear down what I just built. That was really worth it. No. And so, but sometimes they do. Or they might be, sometimes outside ministries have been known to, letter B, draw disciples unto themselves. Paul talks about this, leaders that draw disciples to themselves, but sometimes guest ministries can so elevate what they're doing to such a degree that the people can begin to transfer their support from their local church to this traveling ministry. And those who follow the outside ministry may even set themselves up to start being a judge and a critic of the local church, because we're not really doing this. This ministry's out here doing that. And they start taking their tithe, they start taking their other things, and they start giving it to this traveling ministry, and they start doing everything to follow this traveling ministry, and it actually, they're making their own disciples out of your church. And that ends up hurting the local church rather than helping the local church. Another abuse, another way they can hurt the church, letter C, is to abuse their position for personal financial gain. Ministries at times insist on taking their own love offering. Has anybody ever done that with you? I'll take my own offering. No, you won't. No, you won't. Never let a guest ministry take their own offering, because it's terrible abuse in these days, let me tell you. And they will go on, and they will use all kinds of guilt, and they will do this and that and the other, and they'll leave with a suitcase full of stuff that really should be in the local church. I tell visiting men, listen, we will pay you an honorable honorarium for your ministry here, but you're not going to take an offering under any circumstances. Sometimes that doesn't go down too well, but the whole point is we want to eliminate the idea of hirelings. That is, people who only do what they do for money, and actually abusing the people with what they say about money and what they do with money. And sometimes this comes in many other forms. They use the church for marketing their books, their tapes, other items. They can use the church membership to enhance their mailing list. Can you give us a list of all the members? Or can we pass around this clipboard for anybody that wants to be on my ministry mailing list? No. you're going to end up again. They're going to start communicating with those people on their own, outside of you, through the mail, and they're going to be asking for stuff every time. They're going to be asking for stuff every time. And that stuff that they ask for is the same kind of stuff they're supposed to be giving to your church. And in the end of the day, they're going to hurt you more than they have helped you. And if they start talking this way, you just sort of say, red flag, red flag, red flag. I don't know if I want this ministry in my church. Because some of them are so used to this, they can't control themselves when they get there. And then they start doing this and start doing that and passing out flyers. And you know they're going to ask them for money. You know they're going to start an ongoing. You know they're never going to get off of that mailing list once they're on it. And that's just not what you want to subject your people to. So they can abuse that position for financial gain. Letter D, sometimes they damage the church by overstepping the authority of local leadership. Traveling ministries are not over the church, no matter what they call themselves. If my guy might say, well, I'm an apostle. So what? So what? You may be an apostle to some, but you're not an apostle to me. Because an apostle is not a title, it's a relationship. It's like somebody says, I'm a father, so therefore I want to tell all these children here what to do. No. You may be a father, but you're not my father. You may have authority in some people's lives that way, but you don't have it in mine. You are a guest in this house. And sometimes local leadership are intimidated by ministries that come in, and sometimes they come in like they run the place. Mobile ministries can sometimes see themselves as a much higher level than the local leadership. Whenever I visit a church, I fully understand that senior pastor is the covering and the head of that church, and the elders are the covering for that church, and that I am coming in not over them but under them. I am here to serve you. How can I serve you? And I can't go to the congregation and give guidelines and orders and commands and things that they should do that I have not cleared with the leadership team. Or if the leadership team asks me to take so much time and I take more, or the leadership team asks me to avoid something and I do it anyway. Well, I am not rightly related to authority, and therefore I don't think you want to have people like that in your church. Because they don't understand that the highest authority in any local church that has been established is its own leadership team. And when you come in as a guest ministry, you're coming in just as that, a guest, under them, not over them. And so you need to be asking questions as a guest ministry. How can I help you? Is there anything that you feel I could impart to you? Is there something that you would like me to do while I'm here? It's not, let's just make a God out of this person. Let's worship him for a while. And then we might get to the Lord eventually if this keeps up. No. That ministry is there to serve. Build the house. Build the leadership team. Build, but not contradict. There are so many so-called prophets and apostles around today who did not submit their own ministries to anyone, who want to speak into and adjust churches where they have no authority or relationship. Just because somebody calls himself a prophet or someone calls himself that doesn't mean anything. Prove all things. Hallelujah. We're going to get ourselves into trouble. Amen. All right, so outside ministries can be negative. They can be positive. We want to balance it out here. We want to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Let's look at Roman number 3. As with everything else, we must strike a balance in the use of guest ministries. We want the benefit that they bring, but we want to guard against the things that are going to hurt us. We don't want to be foolish. We don't want to open the door indiscriminately to anybody. The same flow of water can be a raging flood that destroys everything in its path, or if it's channeled properly, it can be refreshing and life wherever it goes. And we want to make sure that happens. So what can we do? Letter A, know the ministries that you receive. Do everything you can to get to know. Don't just take somebody else's recommendation. How many times haven't you been burned by, well, he was recommended by so-and-so. That's only because so-and-so didn't want to say anything bad about him. Or that's only because so-and-so was trying to get him out of their church and into yours. Know the ministries. Know those that labor among you and are over you in the Lord. This means doing everything you can to familiarize yourself with them, their ministry, and their teaching. Letter B, be sure all ministries are under some local church authority. You need to ask that ministry who calls on the phone, well, what is your home church, and what eldership from what local church do you submit yourself to and your ministry? A lot of visiting and traveling ministries don't really have any local church connection. They don't really have any eldership authority in their life. They maybe have put together some sort of a board that is this person over here, that person over there, and that person over there, who never see each other, don't really know what you're doing, but they say, I'm under the authority of a board that you set up, that you established, that you appointed. You're not in a local church. You're not submitted to a leadership team. Every believer in the New Testament was part of a local church and under the authority of a given local church. There were none of this stuff just going around on your own. My ministry, my ministry, my ministry. Forget your ministry. Where are you submitted? In other words, if something goes wrong in your ministry, who am I supposed to call? Who are you accountable to? And it better be a local church. If it's not a local church, I don't want to hear about it. Why? Because every believer needs to be submitted to a local church, to a local church leadership. Even apostles. They don't just run around on their own. Paul, the apostle, was under the covering of the Antioch church, and he always came back there, and he always reported back, and that's how he lived. Yes, because of the transportation issues and phone issues, which they didn't have in those days, he was gone for extended periods of time, but he always came back and gave a report. He always came back and was accountable for what he did. So be sure all ministries are under some local church authority. Letter C, do not allow visiting ministries to take their own offering. I already talked about that. Much abuse could be avoided if the simple guideline was followed. Letter D, do not allow visiting ministry to garner a mailing list from your church. I've already talked about that. Nothing but abuse will come from that. Whatever communication they have to your congregation, they can give through you as the spiritual leader of the congregation, and you will, if you feel you should, communicate with them. Letter E, clearly communicate any parameters or guidelines within which you would like the visiting ministry to operate. So when you have a guest ministry come in, tell them, what is expected of them. Tell them what you don't want them to do. Tell them what you do want them to do, and put the parameters around it. And if they don't follow the parameters, then you know what? This might not be able to work. So use cautions when they just disregard it. And if you are a guest ministry and the pastor has given you certain guidelines, stay within them, and don't ask the congregation if you can violate them. Well, the pastor said I should preach till 12 o'clock, but I'm not done with my message. How many feel okay about me keeping going? First of all, they're going to say keep going because they don't want to raise their hand for the other thing, but they really want you to stop. And you've just gone around the pastor, around the elders, around everybody in authority, and you've gone straight to the people, and you've set yourself up as an authority by doing that. It's getting very quiet in here. Letter F, selectively feed these ministries to your people. Don't just take any ministry that comes, but choose them wisely. You only have so many opportunities for guest ministry. Make sure that you're giving them people that are going to really help you. And you're still the pastor. You're still pastoring through these people. You select them and so forth so that you know what your people need and you know what will serve them the best. Roman numeral 4, outside ministry should be seen as a support to local leadership, not an authority over local leadership. You might have noticed throughout these notes I've used visiting ministry or guest ministry. I've never used the term translocal ministry. There's a term that's used a lot today, translocal, and what it tends to do is elevate traveling ministries to a place of more authority than God really gives them in the Bible. The local church is like a natural family. It is an autonomous social unit. Now, I'm talking about when the church has come to maturity. We're talking about church planting here. But when you, first of all, you're under a sending church. That's your covering. And then later on, when you develop your own elders, the elders of that church and the team there becomes the covering of the church, which becomes self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating. It's much like a family. I raise kids. Yes, they depend upon my support for a while. but then they establish their own families, and in that state they might still depend upon me a little bit, but eventually they're able to stand on their own, and that relationship changes a little bit, but they become a self-governing body. And that's the way the local church is. It's ruled from within by a local eldership. In the embryo state, of course, it's assisted with apostolic ministry, but there comes a time when they come to maturity where they are to stand on their own. That, as the church is established, the base for authority becomes the local eldership of that church. And it's not traveling ministry. It's not anybody that comes in from the outside to give a voice there. Those ministries need to recognize their proper relationship to that local church. All right, our last section for today, Roman numeral 5, outside ministries should be treated with honor and respect. All right, okay, we've sorted this thing out. We're going to accentuate the positive. We're going to eliminate the negative. We're going to understand where the authority of visiting ministry lies in relationship to the local leadership team. But then now, how do we handle that ministry when it comes? And I do believe that we should treat visiting ministries with honor and respect. The more we honor, the more we respect, the more we release that ministry to function in our midst. And so here are some of the things that you need to do when you are having a guest ministry in your place. By the way, whether a guest ministry comes back to your place or not is often conditioned by how you treat them when you had them. There are some hotels I will never go back to. Why? Well, it was dirty and it wasn't prepared and it was a bad experience. There are some businesses I will never go back to again. I say to my wife sometimes, mark that one down as a never return again to that place. Don't ever eat in that restaurant again. I was just in one the other day. Some pastors invited me to lunch. And after it was over, I said to Pastor James, because we were there together, I said, you know what? This goes on my never eat here again list. Well, why? There's just something, there's a lot of things that go into that, but I think ministries, as much as they want to be spiritual, the truth is we're also natural beings, and that is affected by the experience that we have. Letter A, make sure travel arrangements are satisfactory. You know, how are they getting here? Are they paying their own way? How much do we need to make sure that they have airfare, if airfare is required, and these kind of things, make sure that that's all taken care of. When you invite somebody to minister in your church, you're not inviting them to minister out of their own pocket. I've been to churches before where they basically, I had a friend of mine, we did this seminar in this particular church, and we came week after week and then did Saturday seminars. Let's see, actually it wasn't week after week, it was a seminar started on Thursday night. We had to drive one way about 100 kilometers, and then we had to come back at night. We did it Monday night, we did it Tuesday night, we did it Wednesday night, we did it Thursday night, we did it Friday night, we did it all day Saturday, and then we did 2 services on Sunday, and every day, because they didn't provide any accommodation for us. Of course, we had responsibilities during the day anyway, but we drove every time, so we had, I don't know how many trips in the car. We both went together to save costs, but that's a lot of miles, and it probably cost us, well, I'm trying to translate that into rand, but 600, 700 rand in just fuel costs. Plus, usually we were coming at the dinner hour, so we'd buy some food on the way down or something, and then we handed out notes and in a little booklet to give to everybody, and we were there hours and hours and hours. You add up all the hours in the week that we were there. It was an amazing time, and they gave us both. Well, in rand, it would have been 400 rand. They gave us 400 rand. It did not cover the gas. When we got it, we both looked at each other. I mean, we had put in hours and hours and hours with this church, and we had, out of our own pocket, we had really provided for that to happen, which was just out of our own family budget. It was not like a fund we have to draw from. And we looked at ourselves when that was all over, and then we said, let's just go buy the biggest steak that we can eat. It ain't going to do us any good for anything else. Let's just go at least have a good meal. And it took the whole thing. And But when they call me to come back, I'd love to come, but I can't afford it. I can't afford to come because it costs me too much when I come to you. It shouldn't cost anybody anything to come to you to serve you in that way. You've got to take care of those things. Make sure you pick them up on time. I've been left at airports for hours at times. People fell asleep or forgot or did this or that. And I tell you what, it doesn't leave a very good impression. When you get up to minister, you just feel, man, I just feel the love in this place. Make sure that their lodging is comfortable. Make sure that their meals are provided for. Be aware of any food preferences or aversions. Maybe there are certain foods they can't eat or they're allergic to them, and you should know that in advance and ask them these kind of questions in advance. You might even develop a little form. I know a lot of churches have it where they give it to their guest ministry to just sort of fill out and just say before they come, especially if there's overnight and a lot of meals involved. Sometimes it's not. It's local, and it isn't really that big of a deal. Also then, respect their privacy. I've had people who invite me to minister, and they're going to house me in their own home with 3 or 4 children, small children, and it's just, there's no way to get private where you can even pray, you can study, and then they put you in a bedroom that doesn't even have a chair to sit down in, so it's either lay down in the bed in your room or be out with all the fam. Enjoy the family, which is fine. I love kids, but, you know, I'm here to minister. I'm here to hear from God. I'm here to bless. And so try to make sure their privacy is respected and you don't have to walk through the family to go to the bathroom or the shower and got to walk through the house with a towel around you while you're going to be ministering. Make sure they are aware of your expectations and schedule. What do you want them to do? How often are they going to preach? Approximately what times? Approximately how long? Any extra meetings that might be there? Are you going to ask them to counsel with people? Are you going to have a prayer meeting during the week or this or that? Let them know all those things in advance so that they can prepare their heart for that. Be careful not to overwork them. You know, you work them too hard, they won't be good for much of anything. I've been in places where they kind of expect you to go till 2 or 3 in the morning, you know, prophesying over people. And was in this one church, they have 20,000 members, you know, and they didn't ever want to stop a meeting. They just wanted to keep going and going. Well, night after night, how much can you do that? You know, the last night was fine, but, you know, it's bad. Standing for 4 or 5 hours at a time, praying for people. Nobody can do that. Be careful not to do not use them to counsel your people. You save up all their tough cases. We just have this one person we like to meet. So you get all the demon-possessed people that you can meet with after the service, you know. Hard cases, the pastor. I'd rather coach you through it than go do it myself. Ask them for any input they might have in your situation, and be sure to bless them financially for their labor. The Bible says the labor is worthy of his hire. And I think that, again, even though you don't want people to be hirelings, on the other side of it is we want to be known for generosity. We want to be generous people. And the Bible does teach us that the labor is worthy of his hire, and we need to be able to honor that as much as we can. All right, well, hopefully some of these guidelines will help you in this whole area. We have it in the church planting course because, you know, when you're planting a church, you need to bring in others as much as you can. And sometimes when you're in your church planting stage, I mean, ministries will be more than happy to give themselves freely to you and just help in what you're doing. But throughout the life of the church, you'll be involved in having guests into your house to minister to your people. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish up our last session.